Okay, we are officially at 8:30 p.m. My name is Ron. I'm an alcoholic. How you all doing? Welcome to the Conscious Contact Speaker Group of Doylestown. First, I got to announce the winner of tonight's Cadillac Escalade door prize. I'm just kidding. We do have an announcement, though. We have a anniversary coming up the end of this month, April 27th. We're putting on a little mini convention here. There'll be 7 speakers from multiple states. It's absolutely free. Comes with a free lunch. They'll go through all 12 steps. It starts at 9 a.m. The flyers are on the back table back there. You can actually tape them to the wall. You can take a picture with your phone. It makes it really easy that way. Or you can actually take the physical flyers. To stay connected with this group, we have a Facebook page, the Conscious Contact Speaker Group of Doylestown. It's not only what goes on in this group, but what goes on up and down pretty much the East Coast. If you have some kind of anniversaries or workshops or conventions or roundups, please post them in there. It lets everybody stay connected in AA and keep them connected to recovery. What else do I got to talk about? That's about it. Brian's going to come up here and share. Oh, I do have a little announcement. Our speaker tonight, we had Dave D coming up from Maryland, but he had to reschedule because he has an illness till May 11th. Chris B was kind enough to take out of his time and come all the way over here from New Jersey, so thank you, Chris, and sit and relax.
All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Conscious Contact Speaker Group of Alcoholics Anonymous. My name is Brian, and I am an alcoholic. This is a 1-hour speaker meeting that meets every Saturday at St. Paul's Lutheran Church, 301 North Main Street, 8:30 p.m. in Doylestown. The business meeting for this group meets every Saturday at 7 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. Right here. The purpose of this group is to provide a consistent message of hope and recovery through God reliance and service to others through practice and teachings of the 12 steps. We record all speakers so that others may benefit from their message of recovery. If you wish not to be recorded, simply ask. This is an open meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. The group would like to welcome everyone, especially newcomers. Is there anyone that's new or from out of town that would like to introduce themselves by first name basis? Yes. Welcome.
Welcome. My name is Andy, and I'm an alcoholic.
Welcome. Diana, welcome. That's it. The Conscious Contact Speaker Group encourages sponsorship. Would anyone with working knowledge of the 12 steps and that is willing to sponsor, please raise their hands. All right, so those are the sponsors. If you're new or if you're struggling, grab one of those people after the meeting and we'll help you hopefully get into the solution. Are there any announcements for the good of AA? Yes. Go ahead, Daryl.
My name is Daryl. I'm an alcoholic. April 15th, 2019, immediate PA at 6 o'clock p.m. is their anniversary. Myers Raymer is the main speaker, and Terry E. is the Al-Anon speaker. Everybody's more than welcome to come out. Food and fellowship start at 6. Please come out to support. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Daryl.
My name's Heather, I'm an alcoholic. May 19th is Strength anniversary, and that is located in East Greenville, PA. And speakers coming from Harrisburg, so that's going to be a good time. And if you have any questions, you can come and see me. It starts at 10 a.m. for food and fellowship, and 11 a.m. is a speaker. As well as ECPA, which is the Eastern Area Conference of Young People in Alcoholics Anonymous, is coming to Pennsylvania. So elections are going to be held in 2 weeks. I'm going to Pittsburgh for them. If anyone is interested or wants to know more, you can come to me.
Thanks for sharing.
Yes.
Ken, I'm an alcoholic.
Ken.
And the Sellersville Group of Alcoholics Anonymous is celebrating their 70th anniversary. We're trying to get a past delegate to speak at it. Food, fellowship, and fun will be at 7:30, and speaker at 8:30. That's on May 13th. In Sellersville will be a main and church streets in Sellersville will be a main.
Awesome. Thank you. In the back.
Dave,
Dave.
April 23rd, Tuesday night, Team to Believe Your Doylestown, having their anniversary, 6:30 Food and Fellowship. It's about Capitol Church. And of course, this weekend is the coming up weekend, the evening roundup. Even if you want to come for the day, the meetings around the clock, just drop by the Grand Hotel and have a good time. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you. That's it? Okay. This group has a couple of quick announcements. We have meeting lists and big books on easy terms. Please see me or any home group member after the meeting. If you cannot afford a big book, the Conscious Contact Speaker Group will give you one at no charge. Anyone willing to make donations for the purchase of big books and CDs to help those who cannot afford them can put donations in the jar on the back table marked Big Book and CD donations. If you would like a CD of any speaker, past or present, see me or Ron before or after the meeting. They are available free of charge. And now I believe Alex is going to come up here and read the AA preamble.
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Alex, and I am an alcoholic. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is the desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politic, organization, or institution. Does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety. I have Daryl to come up and read the AA 12 Steps of Recovery.
My name is Daryl. I'm an alcoholic. These are the 12 steps of AA. Step 1, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives have become unmanageable. Step 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Step 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. Step 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Step 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. Step 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. Step 7, humbly asked Him to remove our shortcomings. Step 8, made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. 9, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so will injure them or others. Step 10, continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, properly admitted it. 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. And step 12, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs.
All right, 7th tradition, every A group ought to be fully self-supporting, declining outside contributions. At this time, we're going to pass the basket. We have no dues or fees, but we do have expenses. Your donations help us to provide many services, such as rent and big books, CDs, and workshops. There is absolutely no smoking on the church property. That's the church's policy. Pretty much goes for all churches these days. We're very lucky to have this beautiful multi-million-dollar facility to have our meeting at, so if you could please help us out and being considerate of that as you're coming and going, and keep the premise, nice and clean. Please take a moment to silence your cell phones and limit movement during the meeting to avoid distractions. And now to introduce our speaker for tonight, a good friend of the Conscious Contact Speaker Group. Please help me to welcome from the Philly Speaker Group, Chris.
My name is Chris Bruner and I'm an alcoholic. I'm happy to be here tonight. I'm your backup speaker. Ron called me on Wednesday, and I had one of those weeks where it was a good week. Like, I felt like I was very productive, but I worked a lot. I was very busy. My daughter's been sick. I think I'm starting to come down with whatever she had. And, what was it, like 7 o'clock on Wednesday, Ron calls me. I'd been up since 5 o'clock in the morning. I'd just gotten home from work. I was dirty. And I'm eating dinner with my wife, and I see Ron call, and I put him into voicemail. And I looked over at my wife and I said he had a cancellation for a speaker and he is going to ask me to speak, and Saturday was going to be my day off and I was going to relax and I was going to watch TV. And I made it about an hour and I gave Ron a call back. And that's one of the things that AA has taught me to do. It's taught me to show up and say yes. And I called Ron back, and Ron said, we had a cancellation. And I said, Ron, I'd be more than happy to come. And I hung up the phone, and I looked at my wife, and I said, there goes my Saturday. But no, I am. I mean, then now today came, and a couple of the guys from the group came over today, and everybody was hanging out, and it was a great day, and it was beautiful outside, and we played with the dog in the backyard, and then we all took the road trip up here, and I'm glad. I'm glad I came now. Anyway, I have a sobriety date, October 19th, 2010. My home group is the Philly Speaker Group. If this isn't a little bit backward, we're the Philly Speaker Group, but we meet in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. My sponsor says that the New Jersey Speaker Group probably meets in Harrisburg somewhere. We call ourselves the Philly Speaker Group, but we're a big book meeting. I can't figure that out. I have a sponsor. I get to sponsor other guys and jump right into my story. It starts in 1979 in Omaha, Nebraska. I was not yet born, but my parents were in a meeting probably a lot like this one. It's Foxhall Group. It's in Bellevue, Nebraska, right outside Omaha South by the Strategic Air Command, the Offutt Air Force Base. It's a big group speaker meeting. People dress up probably, definitely a lot like this group. And my mom and dad, at the time, from what I know today, they may have had maybe, a couple of weeks sober. I guess my dad, he's sitting over here somewhere. My mom's sitting back there somewhere, and halfway through the meeting, their eyes locked. Neither one of them are paying attention to the speaker, but they start paying attention to each other. I think 9 months to the day after that I was born. They got married somewhere in between. I always tell people to be careful what they wish for in Alcoholics Anonymous, because what you could end up with 38 years later is me standing up here talking about my resentments. But anyway, so that would have been a beautiful story if they would have stayed sober, but neither one of them did. They got distracted with each other, and they both relapsed very shortly thereafter. They got divorced. They had, it was an abusive relationship, and it was just bad. And my dad, when I was a little kid, we moved in with my grandparents, and I was very close to my grandmother. And I grew up in a household where everybody drank. My dad drank, my grandfather drank. My grandfather had been a bookmaker and owned bars. My aunts, my uncles drank. My cousins drank. Everybody in my family drank. And I watched my grandfather's brothers when I was a little kid die of cirrhosis of the liver. And I remember going over to my Uncle Don's house, and Uncle Don held the record in the state of Nebraska for the most DWIs. Uncle Don got DWIs on wheeled vehicles. I guess you could call them vehicles. Some people call them tricycles, and he did. He got it. My Uncle Don got a DWI on his daughter's tricycle. He got a DWI on the golf cart. He got a DWI any way you could imagine getting a DWI. Uncle Don got one. He got a lifetime revocation of his driver's license, and he died of cirrhosis of the liver. And I watched Uncle Don die of cirrhosis of the liver, and I remember going to his house when I was a little kid, and you go inside the house, and it smelled like urine, and Don had been divorced 4 times. None of his kids talked to him, and he really died kind of a miserable existence. And his hands looked like his skin looked like sandpaper, felt like sandpaper, and his fingernails were tough and jaundiced and yellow, and his whites of his eyes, you couldn't see them because they were so yellow. And he died a miserable, slow, painful death. And I watched that as a little kid. I watched that happen to my Uncle Don and my Uncle Jimmy, and I watched it happen. And when I was a little kid, some of my first memories, I remember being 6 years old, and my grandmother's the only person in my family that didn't drink. She was a good woman. She was a Catholic. She went to church every day of the week. She was a registered nurse. She had a profession at a time when women did not have professions. And my grandmother, absolutely, she loved her family to death. She was probably a little bit of an Al-Anon, but she loved her family to death. And I remember being 6 years old, and it's a couple of days before Christmas. And a couple of days before Christmas, I'm at my grandmother's house, and my cousins were in town and they were visiting, and they're staying at my grandmother, my grandfather's house. And the tree's decorated, and there's the snowmen out front and the lights outside, and you go inside and there's the nativity scene with the manger and presents under the tree and Christmas music in the background. And my grandmother, she decorated the house. I mean, it was beautiful. And me and my little cousins were underneath the tree, and we're shaking the presents trying to figure out what's inside of them. And maybe a day or two before Christmas, you start to smell the aroma of the apple pies and the cinnamon, and you start to smell the ham starting to bake. And on Christmas morning, there's all this anticipation leading up to Christmas, and me and my cousins, and we all descend on my grandmother's house and my grandfather's house. And when we show up in the morning, everybody's hugging each other and kissing each other and saying it's been too long and we haven't seen each other in a long time and we should do this more often. And maybe about 10 o'clock in the morning, the men go into the living room and they set up a card table. And the men start gambling and playing cards. And me and my little cousins are going into the living room, and we're going up to the card table, and we're walking up to our favorite uncle, and we go up to our favorite uncle, and I remember going up to my Uncle Bill. And I go up to my Uncle Bill, and he gives me a pat on the back and pulls a silver dollar out from behind my ear, gives it to me. And I walk away, and I'm happy, and you can still, you just feel the women are cooking in the kitchen, and you can just feel the energy, and everybody's excited. And the men at, 11, 12, you can hear the beer cans popping open, and you can hear the drinks getting poured, and the men start drinking. And me and my cousins are going back into the living room at 12, 1 o'clock, and our favorite uncle now, he's telling us, hey kid, can't you just get out of here and just leave us alone? And we go back in maybe 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and now our favorite uncle's telling us, God damn it, just give us some space. And the men are losing money, and they're starting to get their load on, and they're drinking. And by dinner time, food's getting thrown. Christmas is ruined. People are getting pushed. My dad grabs me, my little brother, and my grandmother, and he goes and takes us out, and we go back. My dad grabs me, my little brother, and my stepmother, and he takes us. We go back home, and we get back to my dad's house, and we're back in my dad's house, and we go upstairs. And I'm sitting in my bedroom, and I'm crying, and downstairs I can hear my dad and my stepmother fighting, and I can hear glasses getting broken, and I can hear my stepmother screaming at my dad because he lost the rent money again, gambling with my uncles. And it's an ugly scene. And the next day, my grandmother comes and picks me up, and it's Christmas Day, and my grandmother goes and takes me with her to church, and I go to Mass with my grandmother. And after Mass, my grandmother goes and pulls her car over, and she looks down at me, and she says, Chris, she said, I don't ever want you to drink because I don't want you to end up like your dad and your aunts and your uncles and your cousins. You have so much potential. Has anybody in here ever been told that they have potential? We have a friend who says that if you've been told you have a lot of potential, that means you've never amounted to anything. But no, I'm sorry. I said that once before and I got egged, so you guys are a much kinder crowd. Anyway, my grandmother looks at me and she says, Chris, I love you. She said, please just don't ever, whatever you do, just don't drink. I don't want to see you end up like your dad. She said, you got so much potential and you're going to go so far. And I looked back at my grandmother and I said to her, I said, absolutely. And I looked her in the eyes and I meant it with every fiber of my being because I knew what alcohol seemed to do to everybody else in my family. And I told her I'm never going to drink because I don't want to end up like them. And I don't think there's any such thing as alcohol prevention. We don't find out if we're an alcoholic until we put alcohol in us. And that's what happened to me. I was in 6th grade and I lived in Geneseo, Illinois. And Geneseo, Illinois sits between the Illinois River and the Mississippi River. And there's this old canal called the Hennepin Canal that flows between the two rivers. And it's in the National Historical Registry. It's no longer operational, but it's beautiful. It's a place where young lovers take walks and young families go on Saturdays. And I mean, if you're in AA, you go there and meditate. And it's just like a beautiful place. And I never noticed, me and my buddies would ride our bikes down by the canal, and I never really noticed that it was like this really beautiful, nice place. Until a Friday after school in 6th grade, me and my buddies decide that we're going to go and steal some booze from our folks, and we're going to drink and get our load on and see what happens. So we filled up our book bag with booze, and I filled mine up with Coors Light beer and Canadian Club whiskey. I was drinking that not by choice, but that's what my dad drank, so it's what was accessible. And my dad drank Coors Light beer and Canadian Club whiskey because he'd found out that Coors Light beer doesn't have any artificial additives or preservatives in it, therefore it's healthy. So the drink of choice in the morning was Coors Light beer with a little V8 juice, and I was 25 year old and I still thought that was a great idea. So we steal the booze and we go down to the canal, and we're down by the canal, me and my buddies, we start popping open the beers, and we're drinking beers and passing them around, and we got the bottle of whiskey out, and we got a joint, and we're passing the joint around, and I don't remember if it happened after the first beer or the second beer, or after the first hit or the second hit, but somewhere along the way what started to happen is I was a kid that I always felt like an outsider in school. I always felt like I was a little bit separate and apart from. Like any good gypsy alcoholic family, we moved around a lot, so I was always the new kid in school, and I always felt like the new kid in school. I was a little bit awkward. I was never the smartest. I was never the strongest. I was never the best looking, and I was I was at best average, and I knew that. And I always felt just a little bit different, weird, and awkward. But that night, what started to happen was I started to notice something. I started to notice my perception shift. And I started to notice this cold, dreary, dark world, and it started to just get a little bit brighter. And I started to look up, and I saw the sun setting, and I saw the fall leaves changing colors. And I could hear the water rustling down the canal. And the world just seemed to be okay. And I started rapping with the kids that I was with, and I felt like we'd always been friends. And there was a girl there whose desk was across from mine in school. And it always, she was like the prettiest girl in the class. And every night before I'd go to bed, I'd lay awake in bed and I'd think about what I was going to tell her the next day. And it always sounded so eloquent the night before. But the next day it would come out like, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And for whatever reason that night at the canal, when I went and I had a couple of beers in me and a couple of shots of whiskey and I'd taken a couple of hits off a joint, it came out as eloquently as I had rehearsed it. And we ended up kissing, making out, and I don't know about you, but I think my drinking career was off to an okay start for about an hour. And then I threw up all over. And I think that's the phenomenon of craving that Dr. Silkworth writes in the doctor's opinion in the book Alcoholics Anonymous. That I take a drink and I hit that sweet spot and I'm rapping with the guys and I'm kissing the pretty girl and I overshoot the mark. And I don't even know that it happened. And that was the story of my drinking career. The next morning I woke up and I remembered the magic from the night before. I went to school and I was talking to all my buddies about, man, wasn't that cool? And all I could think about was living for the weekends and waiting until the weekends came around so we could steal booze from our folks and go get loaded. And a couple of times my dad caught me and he went and beat the crap out of me for it, but it didn't matter. It seemed like a small price to pay for the freedom that came with drinking. And I later in life was willing to trade or give away pretty much everything in my life to experience trying to chase what I'd experienced that night at that canal. And something profound happened to me when I was probably about 15 years old. At this point, I'm drinking on the weekends, always overshooting the mark, starting to get in some trouble in school, getting in fights at keggers. And my dad decides he's going to get sober. And my dad starts going to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. And something happened. My dad starts staying sober, and he's not really in AA. He doesn't have a sponsor. He's not taking any steps. He doesn't own a big book. He was showing up to some meetings. He didn't have a home group. He didn't have any commitments. He wasn't plugged in. He was more on the outside of AA. He wasn't really in AA, but he was going to meetings and he was staying sober. And my dad, just after his 1 year AA birthday, his first anniversary, my dad ended up getting arrested for domestic assault for beating up my stepmother on my 16th birthday. My dad went to jail a little over a year sober. On my dad's coming up on his second AA birthday, and my dad, I think he showed up at the clubhouse to get his coin, and he comes home and my dad ends up checking himself into a psychiatric hospital. And at this point, my dad, man, he's beat up. My dad at one time, he was he's a pretty smooth looking guy. He dressed sharp, looked sharp, always clean shaven, hair combed over, drove a new Lincoln, hung out he was a smooth guy. And my dad had lost all that. My dad was unshaven, his hair was all messed up, and he didn't look very good. There was just a darkness in his eyes, and he was wearing sweatpants and a hoodie. My dad wasn't a sweatpants kind of guy. When I first got sober and came to AA, actually, I remember I wore sweatpants to a meeting over in Jersey. And one of the guys looked at me during the meeting and said to me, "Hey, kid, Seinfeld says the sweatpants are for people who give up on life." I haven't worn sweatpants in public since. But my dad at that point had given up on life, and my dad was wearing sweatpants, and my dad looked like a bum, and he felt like a bum, and he was depressed and almost catatonic, and he ends up in a psychiatric hospital for 2 weeks. And my dad had tried to take his own life 3 times and he'd failed, and he's in the psychiatric hospital and they're hooking him up to electricity and they're zapping him and they're giving him all types of medications, and my dad comes out of there more screwed up than he'd gone in. And my dad goes to a meeting at 7 a.m. at the Easy Does It Clubhouse in Springfield, Illinois. And my dad meets this guy, Steve L. And a bunch of the guys here know Steve. And Steve was just a bright spot in my family's life, like an angel in my dad's life. And Steve sees my dad before the meeting, and afterward he goes up to my dad. And Steve's one of the kindest, nicest, gentlest guys I've ever met in my life. And he's a guy that believes in the book Alcoholics Anonymous. In the early 80s, he started a Big Book meeting in Springfield, Illinois, when nobody even knew what the Big Book was. And Steve goes up to my dad and starts talking to him and gets my dad. My dad starts hanging out with these guys that Steve sponsors. And they went to a little diner on Friday nights, and they're hanging out together. And my dad starts going through the book Alcoholics Anonymous with this guy, Steve. And I remember that like it was yesterday. I was 17 years old, and I think Steve had been sponsoring my dad for maybe a couple of weeks. And my dad asked me if he can take me out to dinner, and I said, yeah, no problem. So me and my dad go out to dinner, and my dad looks different by this point. My dad's wearing nice pants. He's got his shoes shined again. He's got his hair combed over. He looks sharp. He's clean shaven. He looks like he wasn't the same guy that walked out of that psychiatric hospital. And my dad, on the way home after dinner, stops the car and pulls the car over and looks at me and makes amends. And I found out several years later that my dad had gone out over the course of a couple of day period, and he went back and paid back all the people that he'd burned, ripped off, hurt, harmed, family members, landlords, everything. And my dad, something happened to him, man. My dad went from being this, I remember watching my dad when I was a kid. My dad slept with a .40 caliber pistol next to his bed because he didn't know who he had ripped off, robbed, or hurt that was going to come looking for him. I watched my dad almost beat a guy to death with a baseball bat in a parking lot because the guy went and took my dad's parking place. And I watched this guy that had been a monster when I was growing up almost instantly overnight turn into the sweetest, kindest, gentlest guy. And a bunch of the people in here, they know my dad. My dad, man, he's one of the nicest guys. He's 24 years sober now, sponsors a bunch of guys, active in AA, and he's a great guy. And I watched that transformation happen. When my dad he's making amends, and he's going through the steps and starts sponsoring guys, and I watched my dad change right in front of me. And I wasn't quite ready. I got in, I started drinking. My drinking just kept becoming more frequent. And by the time I dropped out of high school. I got a GED only because I lived in the state of Illinois and you couldn't get your driver's license unless you were in high school or got a GED. So I got a GED so I could get a driver's license. And I just basically went in, I just lived to drink and party, and that was it. And I don't know, I was maybe like 19 or 20 and I noticed something. I noticed there were people going to college that liked to drink like I did, and they'd go to frat parties and stuff like that, and they had fake IDs and nobody hassled them about their drinking. So I started taking college classes. I finished a 4-year program in either 8 or 9 years, give or take a year. But I took all night classes. It was the most convenient. I was not a morning type of guy. Something happened when I was maybe like 22 or 23 years old. I'd been at a concert with some of my buddies in Pittsburgh. After the next morning, we woke up, and I would wake up, man, and I would have terrible hangovers. And I couldn't eat. I couldn't hold food down. I was shaky. And one of my buddies sees how bad a condition I'm in, and I'm walking to go take a shower, and he hands me 2 beers and tells me to take the beers in the shower with me. I take the beers in the shower with me. I walk out, and I'm smooth. I'm cool as a cucumber, and I feel all right, and I can eat. And I was like, woo! I was like, that's the solution I've been looking for. And what happened from that point forward is I became an around-the-clock drinker, and now I'm drinking in the mornings to go and smooth out. And I started keeping a bottle next to my bed, and I was in bad shape, and I was only in my early 20s. I was 26 years old. I graduated from college, and I have no idea what I want to do with my life because I drink too much to be functional. I have 3 DWIs by this point, a couple of other petty arrests, urinating in public all over myself, just nonsense. And I don't know what to do with my life, so I take the LSAT. I do pretty well. I get into law school, and I move to New Jersey to go to law school at Rutgers. I moved to New Jersey, and when I moved to New Jersey, I said, you know what? My life is going to change. I know I partied a lot, I drank too much, but now it's time to get serious. And I'm going to go to law school, and I'm going to be a different guy. And I've been involved in some illicit activity because it allowed me to go and drink and party. And, I had a $100 a night bar habit. And it allowed me to be able to not work and to be able to drink the way I like to drink. And I moved to New Jersey, and I said, it's going to be different. I wish there would have been a sign when I came into that sign that says, welcome to New Jersey. I wish it would have said, warning, Chris, you're bringing yourself with you. But it didn't. And I moved to New Jersey thinking that things are going to be different, and they're not. Along the way, I would look and I'd see what other people were doing that seemed to be normal, and they seemed to be happy. And one of the things I noticed is a lot of them had families. So I asked a girl to marry me. We got engaged right away. Warning for any newcomers in here, she did not treat my alcoholism either. So I get engaged, and I go into my third year of law school, and I'm drinking around the clock. The fiance, she's drinking with me. And you know what? That was a tragic story. She didn't make it. I found out 1.5 years ago from her brother that she died as a direct result of alcoholism. The last time I'd seen her, I was in North Jersey at a meeting, and I saw her in there. She had maybe a couple of weeks sober, and I didn't even know what to say to her. She was there. She was with a sponsor, and not everybody makes it. And so I'm in my third year of law school, second semester, and I'm studying for the state bar, and I'm just a mess. I'm drinking around the clock. Just in bad shape. I got my 4th DWI by this point, and I end up getting in a minor car accident in Camden, New Jersey, a little fender bender, and I thought I was this real smooth guy. I thought I was kind of like a Caucasian version of Tony Montana, but I thought I was low key. I didn't think that anybody knew what I was up to, and I was wrong. When I got in the minor car accident, task force ran down on my car, and they found a loaded handgun in the third row of a Dodge Durango. I get pulled out of the vehicle, and I get handcuffed. They find a couple of other things in the car that I wasn't supposed to have, and I get taken to the Camden County Jail, and I get booked in on a $50,000 cash bond. I go and I call up my ex from the payphone, and I tell her what happened, and I give her the name of an attorney, and I ask her to call the attorney and to talk to the attorney to get a hold of a bail bondsman, to get a bail made. I gave her the combination to a digital safe in the house, and I ask her to go make my bail. And she calls the attorney. I call her back, and I call her back the next morning, and she says, your bail's been made, and you're going to be out in a couple hours. I get released from the Camden County Jail, and listen to me, I'm in my third year of law school, second semester. I know I'm in a lot of trouble, and I know that what I need to do is I need to make it to that attorney's office. I'll walk out of the Camden County Jail, and to my left I can see Hank's Bar on the corner of 3rd and Market in Camden, New Jersey. And instead of going to that lawyer's office, I walk into Hank's Bar and I order a shot and a beer. And what happens is, I just kind of go like this. I go, because as much anxiety, fear, and everything else as I had, I took that shot and that beer and I felt okay. 4 or 5 days later, I stumble into the attorney's office, and I'm reeking of booze, and I haven't shaved, and I sit down, and he looks at me and he says, Chris, you're in a lot of trouble. He said, I'm going to do what I can for you, but you might end up in prison. He said, you're going to get indicted by a grand jury. And he said, you need to stop doing what you're doing, or there's nothing I can do for you. And I look back at him, and with every fiber of my being, as much as I meant it when I told my grandmother that I was never going to get loaded, I look back at him and I said, Carl, I'm done. I know I'm in trouble, and I'm done. 2 days later, I got busted on the corner of 5th and Indiana in the Badlands section of Philadelphia. I got set up by a CI, and I got taken to the 24th, 25th precinct, and I was booked for interstate possession with intent to distribute CDS, heroin, and cocaine. Listen, I'm in my third year of law school, second semester, and I know I'm in a lot of trouble at this point. So I call up the ex. She gets a hold of an attorney. She got a combination of the safe. I got high bail. They're able to go and post the bail and get me out. I walk out of the 24th, 25th. And I walk out and I see a taxi cab driving by. And I hop in that taxi cab and I have him take me to the corner of 3rd and Indiana, where there was a little bar that was on the corner, 2 blocks from where I'd just been busted. And I go and I walk inside, and I got a check from the jail I signed the check over to the bartender and I said, line them up, baby. Shot and a beer. Shot and a beer. Canadian Club and a Budweiser back. And that was it. And what happened was, after 2 or 3, all that fear, anxiety, and everything I felt disappeared. And for that sense of relief that Dr. Silkworth talks about in the doctor's opinion, that sense of ease and comfort, I was willing to give away a promising law degree and a promising law career. Marriage, relationships, it didn't matter. Over the course of the next couple of weeks, the law school intervenes and they tell me that I'm no longer welcome there. They'd gotten notice from the New Jersey State Police that I'd been in some trouble, and they said I was no longer welcome in their law school. The fiance, her family intervenes, and they go and they take her to a treatment center down in Florida, and she's gone. And I feel like I'm standing in the ocean and the high tide's coming in over my head. So I called up my dad and I said, Dad, can you help me? And my dad says, son, I love you, but he said, there's nothing I can do for you. He said, I'm going to say a prayer that you're able to find a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous and go in there and get honest with the people there. And my dad hung up the phone on me. And I talked to my dad since then. My dad told me it was the hardest thing he ever did. My dad hangs up the phone, I dial 411, and I get the South Jersey intergroup. It was about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and I'd been balled up in the fetal position with a .25 automatic in my mouth, and I'm thinking about pulling the trigger, and I just can't bring myself to do it. And I end up getting a hold of the AA intergroup, and they tell me there's a meeting at 315 South 5th Street in Camden, New Jersey, the Last Stop Clubhouse. And I ended up walking by the grace of God to that clubhouse. And I'm about a block away, and I had a bunch of warrants for just a bunch of nonsense, plus I'm on bail for 2 days, and I see a cop car. And I don't know what kept me walking, because I was afraid, and I didn't want to keep walking, but I did. And I got to that clubhouse, and I'm about half a block away. Most of the guys have heard this story from Eddie Z. He was guy was like an angel in my life, and he yells, "Yo, Money, come over here. This is the AA place." And I walk over there and I go inside and they give me a cup of coffee filled halfway up. And they sit down and the guys in there talk to me, and I end up going with them to a meeting back in Philadelphia. And what ends up happening is I end up going through probably one of the worst detoxes I'd ever been through in my life. And I'm detoxing cold turkey, and I'm about 5 days into it, and a fear hits me. And the fear that hit me was that this time was just going to be like every other time. And I was going to go and I was going to detox, and I was going to get 30 days together, and I was going to go back out and I was going to start all over again. And a kid comes that's 21 years old, and he grabs me up and he takes me on a walk with him, and he had maybe about 30 days sober. And I'm walking with this young kid, and I don't think me and him have anything in common, but he starts telling me stories about his drinking. And it turns out that he drank in a couple of bars, Brewers in Westmont, New Jersey, and a couple other bars that I drank in. And I start talking to this kid, and we're swapping war stories, and what starts to happen is I start to believe that he drank the way I drank. And I can tell this kid drank the way I drank, and he felt the way that I'd felt. And this is what was different between this kid and every doctor, therapist, psychiatrist, counselor, lawyer, teacher, and every other well-intentioned person that told me I drank too much. The difference between them and that kid, and that's the magic of Alcoholics Anonymous, is I could look at him in the eye and I could tell that he'd felt the way that I'd felt. I could tell that he had drank the way that I had drank, and I could see that he didn't feel that way anymore. And after talking to him for an hour or two, swapping more stories, I said, man, I'll do anything you ask me to do. What's next? And he goes and takes me inside of a house, and we go in this house, and he opens up the book, Alcoholics Anonymous, and we start to read through the doctor's opinion, and we get up to the 3rd step, and we hit our knees in that house, and we say a 3rd step prayer. I was only 5 or 6 days sober, and I was sick, and I was detoxing. And he gives me my 4-step instructions, and I take those 4-step instructions, and I go back to where I was staying at another recovery house, and I go into the recovery house, and that night I can't sleep because I'm detoxing, and I write out every selfish, dishonest, self-seeking thing I'd ever done. And I put it all on paper over the course of a couple hours. The next day I call the kid up, I tell him that I'd finished. And he comes over that night, and over the course of 3 or 4 hours, he hears my inventory. And I put everything out there. He's done hearing my inventory, and I go into a little room by myself for an hour, and I hit my knees, and it's probably the most honest 6th and 7th step experience I've ever had. I go to have that hour alone, and I hit my knees and I started crying, and I wasn't a guy that cried a lot. And I hit my knees and I said, God, please help me. Please help me be different, be a different person. I don't want to hurt people, and I want to be a different person. Please help me. And I went out almost immediately after that, and I started making amends. And one of the first amends that I made, it was to a lady who'd been a landlord of mine in Collingswood, New Jersey. And this lady, I had just like huge resentments toward her. I felt like she was nosy. She would always go and pop into the house that I lived in. She would show up at weird times, and she'd always want to know what was going on. I mean, I look back now, the house was basically like a crack house. I mean, it was a bad scene. And one day, and Jake had been in this house. We knew each other when we were drinking. And this is like a house where there's like bottles of booze, bottles of whiskey on the porch, fights outside, cops getting called, people in and out at all hours. It was one of those type of places. And people sleeping on the couch and nobody knew who they were. And I mean, just weird stuff, right? And drug dealers, you name it, it was going on there. And I'm walking through. I get up one morning at around 1 p.m. and I'm walking into the kitchen to get a beer. Mind you, it was a Coors Light, no artificial additives or preservatives. I was going to put a little V8 juice in it, and I'm walking back, and I feel something hit me on the head. And it's what? It's water, but it doesn't smell like water. It smells like it's brown. And I look up, and it hits me in the forehead, and the ceiling's like collapsing. And I'm like, what the heck? What could that be? So I figure, well, that's why I'm a renter, so I don't have to take care of things like that. So I call up the landlord, and I tell her what's going on. So she goes and she sends a plumber over, and the plumber comes over, and he goes, oh my God, what have you done to this house? And he goes down into the basement, and he goes and snakes the main line, and all these paper towels came shooting out. Because I was a lazy, selfish kind of guy, and I didn't want to go get toilet paper when we ran out, I'd just use paper towels, right? I didn't care. Landlord calls me up, she goes, oh my God, how could you do that to my house? I said, you have a lot of nerve. That's why I'm a renter, so I don't have to deal with stuff like that. Messed up. So she's stopping by my house, trying to see what's going on after that. Trying to look in, stay. And I decided, I'm like, you know what, this lady, man, she just all she wants to do is like check up on me. She's too nosy. I don't know what her problem is. And she must never have had renters before. And I decided the way I'm going to get back at her is I'm just not going to pay the last month's rent. So then I bail on the last month's rent, and of course she goes and calls the people that are my references and stuff like that. Where did Chris go? We're putting him into collection and blah, blah. And I'm like, God, she's just so unreasonable. She should have known what she was getting into. And so she's on my fourth step. And I go, first column, it's the landlord. Second column, she tells people I'm a thief. Third column, parts of self, and we do the turnaround, right? And this 21-year-old kid looks at me, and he goes, you know why she called you a thief? And I'm like, I would love to know. He goes, because you are one. The profound things that sponsors tell us. And I could kind of dig it. I'm like, I probably owe her a couple of dollars, whatever, and I want to get sober, and, I just beg God to help me, be different and change and be a different person and all that stuff. And we end the 7-step prayer with, as I go out from here to do your bidding, so that way I can go out and, make an 8-step list and start paying back the people I ripped off. So the kid tells me I'm going to go make amends to her. Now, my sponsor says something else that's very profound. He says if you owe somebody money, he said the best way to approach them is you just show up with the money in your hand, and they're going to be a lot more interested in hearing from you. So I go and I knock on her door, and she opens up the door, and she goes, I'm calling the cops. And she goes to slam the door on me, and I said, I got your money. And she opens up a little bit, and I make amends to her, and I give her the money, and I pay her back. And it's like a magic trick that happens in Alcoholics Anonymous, because just the same way that my perception had shifted when I drank, my perception started to shift a little bit that day, and I started to see the truth. And I started to see that this lady wasn't unreasonable at all. This was a good woman who was a school teacher, and she'd just gotten married. And her and her kids had moved in with her new husband, and they'd moved into another place, and they went, and this house was their investment property, and this was their future that I'd gone and stolen from them or tried to. And I saw that she was a good lady, and I saw her for who and what she was instead of the case that I'd built against her in my mind. Because here's the thing, when I rip somebody off or I hurt them, I have to build a case against them in my mind to justify my actions and justify the way that I've treated them. And the story that I'd made up and the case that I'd built and what I'd told myself wasn't based in reality, and it wasn't true at all. And what happened was I walked away that day from her doorstep a little freer. And I started to be able to see the truth, and my perception started to change. And I got real active in Alcoholics Anonymous. And what started to happen, Eddie Z I got my first commitment at less than 30 days. There was an hour speaker meeting at the Last Stop Clubhouse in Philadelphia at the time, and it was on Friday nights. And the Last Stop was my first home group. And I love the Last Stop to death. Eddie comes to our home group a lot of times on Thursday nights. And and my first commitment was chairing that Friday night hour speaker meeting, and I'd chair that speaker meeting, and I'd see people show up, man, wearing ties, driving to Kensington to wear a tie to come talk to a bunch of knuckleheads on Friday night, man. I was like, are you kidding? Are you serious? And like, that did something to me, because I saw, I'm like, man, those people care that much about Alcoholics Anonymous that they're willing to go and say yes and show up. And I started getting active. We went to a lot of meetings. Eddie took me to I went to the Area 45 convention with them down to the Cape May Roundup, the Philly Roundup in Cape May, and I'm getting active. And Eddie did something for me when I had maybe about 3 weeks sober. There was a guy that walked into the clubhouse, and Eddie went and assigned me as his sponsor, and told the guy Kenny, he said, Chris is going to sponsor you. And I had my first sponsee at about 30 days, 3 weeks to 30 days sober. And I started sitting down with that guy, reading the doctor's opinion, taking him through the steps, and I started sponsoring other guys, and I stayed real active in AA. I was a little over a year sober, man, and I felt better than I've ever felt in my life. And I walked into a Superior Courtroom in Camden, New Jersey, and the courtroom looked a lot like this room tonight. It was filled up with people from AA. Eddie was there with all the guys, and everybody, a bunch of other guys showed up. People stood up in front of the judge and went and talked to him on my behalf. And there were maybe 50, 60 letters that were written to the judge on my behalf. People telling him how much I changed, and I wasn't that same guy that got busted with that gun and on those drug charges. And I stood up in front of the judge, and he looked at me, he said, son, I can tell that you've changed, something's happened to you. And he said, I'm going to do something. He said, you've been indicted under the Graves Act, so I have to send you to the penitentiary. I don't have any say over that, but I'm only going to sentence you to 3 years with a 1-year mandatory minimum. And I looked back, and I was grateful, man, because when we walked in there, my lawyer told me that I very well could get a lot harsher sentence than that. My lawyer was telling me walking in that I could easily walk out with 10 years. And I walked out with 3 years with a 1, and the bailiff came over and he put me into handcuffs in the courtroom, and I walked out of the courtroom hand in hand with God. And I go into the Camden County Jail, and they take you downstairs, and first you get strip searched, and then they take you into the bullpen, and I'm in the room where they strip search you. And at this point, I was maybe about 13 months sober. I'd sponsored a bunch of guys, and I felt like I knew what I needed to do. I hit my knees, and I said the prayer that you guys taught me, God, please show me how to be of service. And I get taken upstairs to 7-day lockdown. In the 7-day lockdown, a guy comes into the cell, and the guy's an alcoholic. And I sit there and I start sharing my experience, strength, and hope with this guy. And what people in AA told me, that Thursday night, I went to court on a Friday, and that Thursday night I was at a meeting and I was fellowshipping after the meeting. And what people told me is, they said, Chris, when you go to prison, you don't know who you're going to be sent there by God to help. You just go there and try to find ways to be of service. And that's what I did. I got transferred to Craft in Trenton, New Jersey. And when I got to Craft, I said the same prayer. I hit my knees and I said, God, please show me how to be of service. I got taken out I was out on the yard, and I'd been there a couple of days, and I'm walking with the guy on the yard, and the guy's telling me his story, and I'm telling him mine. Guy's an alcoholic. And we go and we hit our knees in the yard at Craft, and we go and we say a third step prayer, and I go and give the guy inventory instructions, and I end up hearing this guy's fifth step on the yard at Craft in Trenton. They give you little postcards that are pre-stamped postcards, and that guy started writing amends letters. I got a letter from that guy after I'd been out of prison maybe about a year, and he'd been transferred to Northern State outside of Newark. And he's in Northern State Prison, and one of the things he tells me in his letters is that one of those amends letters that he'd wrote was to his daughter. And his daughter came, and she started, after they had corresponded for a while, she started visiting him in prison. And one of the things that he was able to tell her was that she thought that there had been something wrong with her all those years because he hadn't been in her life. And he was able to tell her that there was nothing wrong with her, that it was him, that he was an alcoholic, and they started to have healing in their relationship. I got transferred to Bayside State Prison in Leesburg, New Jersey, and I'm locked up in Bayside, and I say the same prayer, God, please show me how to be of service. And my cellie comes in, he's a fellow who's gang affiliated, and he's been in and out of the penitentiary his whole life. And he's an alcoholic too, and I start taking him through the steps, and what starts to happen is we watch a little fellowship grow up around us there, and there's a couple of guys that we're taking through the steps, and we start having little meetings, and we're going out on the yard, and we're talking about Alcoholics Anonymous. And we're standing out on the little yard one night, and the sun's going down, and he looks over at me and he says, "Chris, I'm freer in here than I've ever been in my entire life." And I look back at him and I said, "I know, me too. I experienced complete and total freedom from the bondage of self locked up behind the wall of a penitentiary." I got released on my first parole eligibility date, and my first day out I went to a big book meeting that night, and that weekend I went to the Jersey Shore Roundup, and Jimmy had scholarshiped me in. And I'll tell you, there was no place in the world I wanted to be more, because the entire time I was locked up, I felt free, but I also couldn't wait to get out here with you guys. And I got out, and that was the first place I went to, and I just started getting real active in AA, and I got a job working at Atlantic City Subs, and I started just trying to sponsor as many guys as I could. I started taking a Friday night commitment. I got paroled to a little town called Absecon, New Jersey. I didn't even know what an Absecon, New Jersey was. I was like, where the hell are they sending me to? And I ended up in this little town, Absecon, New Jersey, and I ended up in a recovery house down there on parole, and I kidnapped Jake again. Jake was one of my first sponsees at the last stop. We drank together, and then Jake had called me up one time looking for something that's non-conference approved heroin. But anyway, that's a different story. And I told him, I said, "Come meet me," and I had Jake meet me, and then I kidnapped him and took him to the last stop for a week until Eddie made me let him go. And then I get out of the penitentiary. This is funny too. So I'm locked up. So I was Jake's sponsor before I get locked up, but Jake couldn't stay sober, right? And I started to think Jake was constitutionally incapable. I mean, I'm like, you know, and you have an experience with the steps, and you're like, God, why can't this work for everybody? And I'm in prison, and Jake goes and sends me he ripped off the back of a magazine and somehow got a stamp on it with my inmate number and sent it to the penitentiary, and I'm behind the wall, and I go and I get it gets slipped under at night with your mail, and it's from Jake and says, "Help me." And my bunkie's like, "Man, that dude must be in bad shape." He's like, "Come on." But I get out and I take Jake hostage again in the recovery house. And I'm going to like 2 meetings a day. I'm Mr. AA and sponsoring some guys, and I'm taking a Friday night commitment to John Brooks in Atlantic City, and I'm doing a Sunday commitment with Gary at the time at Hendrick's house in Vineland, and we're just looking for people to help try and be of service. And I'll tell you, everything that's good in my life, man, is a result of Alcoholics Anonymous. Because one of the things that ends up happening to me, we start a Wednesday night meeting down there, speaker meeting. And I'm just having the time of my life, working at the sub shop, active in AA. And my wife, she's right over here, and she's way out of my league, right? And she comes up to me after an AA meeting, and she goes, "Hey, I see all these guys you're helping. You're like, you're super active in AA." She goes, "You want to go out and get coffee sometime?" Dude, it took me like 10 minutes to even go and respond. I was like I was shell shocked, and I finally got the courage to say yes. And you know, it's crazy though, because at the time I'm on parole, right? And my wife she's like a little over a year sober. She's got a little baby. She's living in her grandparents' spare bedroom with no job. And there were literally like old timers that were like trying to push us away from each other. They're like, "Just stay away." We've been married a couple of years now. I walk off of parole. We moved to Philadelphia. We're living in South Philly at 9th and Snyder. I'm working in a pizza shop in Center City. I'm coming home every night, man. I'm doing the dishes, smelling like fryer grease. That was like one of my jobs. I got to take out the fryer grease, and my wife's working as like a part-time bookkeeper. But we're paying the bills. We start our home group. The Philly Speaker Group starts on Greg was there, a couple other people. We start in our living room, and Greg at the time, he's working for a home improvement company. And Greg comes up to me and he's like. And I mean, our house, it was great. It was like, it was like AA clubhouse. We do the same thing, man. That was all day to day. Everybody's just over at my house hanging out. We're having a good time. And I'm going to tell you something else. When I was in prison, I had all this hope, man, and I felt so free. But the one thing that like I felt just like that I had regret about was that on the weekends on visiting day, the only visits I got was from Anthony B. And Anthony would come down and visit me sometimes on the weekends. And that was whose house we moved into in South Philly. Him and Janine, they'd moved up here, and they let me and Jessica move into their house in South Philly, and we're paying them rent. And Anthony would come see me on visit days, maybe about once a month, and he'd drive from Philly to go see me, and there was nobody else. Like, I didn't have my family. I didn't want him to come see me when I'm locked up like that. But I would see other people on visit days going to see their families, and I'm like, man, I'm getting out of prison, and I'm going to be in my early 30s. And I felt like the opportunity to have a family that had just passed me by. And I had some regret about that. Don't ever put the power of God in a box, man. I met my wife and I got a beautiful 6-year-old stepson that, I love him to death like he's my own. And my wife and I, we just celebrated last weekend. It was our daughter's first birthday. And that was just, when she was born, and me and Ron were talking about before the meeting, I was just experiencing like complete and total like unconditional love for another human being. And just such a powerful experience. And AA has helped me so much because to that 6-year-old little boy, Dr. Bob Smith said to use words as a last resort, that we try to show people through our actions. And what AA's taught me to do through sponsoring is to be a role model to that little boy, that little 6-year-old, and to that little girl, that little gift from God, to be able to try to be a role model to her. And we moved to Philly, and Greg at the time, he's working for some home improvement company, and he tells me I'm working for like $8 an hour, and he's like, listen, Chris, I was like the 6-minute share guy. I was like the guy that other people just like wanted to shut down. So Greg looks at me and he goes, I know you like to talk. He goes, I'm working for a home improvement company, and I think you could come to work for this company. I think you do pretty well. And at the time we were taking like a lot of road trips, and we were going to a lot of meetings in different states and stuff like that. And Greg says, listen, I think you could come to work at this home improvement company. And he goes, I would like it if you did, because that way when we take road trips, you won't smell like fryer grease. He's like, I hate to tell you, but he's like, we're not rolling down the window in the middle of the winter because we're cold, like, because we're hot. So I'm like, dude, I don't think they're going to hire me, man. I'm a convicted felon. And Greg's like, oh, don't worry. He's like, the owner's a convicted felon too. It's no problem. You guys will hit it off. So I go to work for this home improvement company, and I'm working there a little while, and I tell Greg, I'm like, you know what, man, I think we could do this too. I think we could take what we've learned in Alcoholics Anonymous, and we could carry it into the business world, and we could start practicing these principles in all of our affairs, and we could show up in a principled way and do what we say we're going to do, and show up when we say we're going to show up, and do what we did tonight, just to say yes, what my sponsors taught me, to say yes. And we did that, and we put out our own shingle, and we opened up our own company, and I think right now we have a little over 100 employees, and it just freaking took off, man. I mean, it's crazy. And, my wife and I'm just going to tell you, this is how delusional we can be, and thank God for sponsorship, right? Because when my wife and when we're going to move in together in Philly, I shouldn't even say this, but I told my wife, I was like, you know what? I'm not going to be able to get a good job. Maybe we should just we'll move into Section 8, we'll get food stamps, and that might be the best shot we're going to have. And I mean, I believe that. Like in my mind, there was like a part of me, and you know what? We just bought a beautiful house in East Cherry Hill. We got a huge pool in the backyard. We're able to share that with our whole home group. We had our little daughter's first birthday there last week, and we had 50 people in our house, family and friends and people from our home group, guys that work for us. I mean, it's freaking amazing, man. I mean, what a beautiful life the AA's given us. And everything from my business to my wife to my daughter, it all happened in here. And it's funny because there's still a part of me that on a night like Wednesday night, when Ron calls me up and I know he wants me to speak, I've gotten so busy with all the beautiful things that AA's given me that I almost forgot where I got it from. And I've seen a lot of guys that their lives caught fire, and gals that lives caught fire like mine, and they forgot where they got it from, and then right back up where we started. So for that reason, I truly am grateful to be here tonight. There's no place in the world that I would rather be in. Thank you for my life.
Let's thank Chris. Epic job. Thank you, sir. Customary for us to form a line and thank our speaker formally. They come here at their own time and expense just to share their experience, strength, and hope. Next week we got Ante K from Croatia, Serbia. He gets mad if I cross them up, so he'll kill me. Don't miss that. He's old. Anyway, there's a meeting after the meeting. Hang out with us, please. If you want to help, we got to put these chairs away. We got to leave. If you get this right, 5 deep, 5 across, the rest go up on the thing. We got a nice way of closing. Our sister group is a big book study. There's flyers back there. Don't forget to take a picture of that. And we'll circle up and if we can do this. Great stuff. Finish with a minute to spare. How are you? Okay, gonna need a bigger boat. All right, let's, you hooked up? Let's take a moment of silence. You do with it whatever you want. If you care to join us, we will end with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father.